been brought to you by the letter C.
Hey everyone, okay, I'm back from the holidays, a few pounds heavier, hair is a little bigger. I'm recovering from all that good holiday food, probably like a lot of you are. So, anyway, let me exercise my mouth a little and jump right into the ABCs of archaeology. And we are up to C. C is for a very fancy French term called Chaîne Opératoire. And I can actually say it like that because, fun fact, I used to be fluent in French. I lived, worked, and studied in France for quite a while. But that was a long time ago. French is a little rusty. So nowadays,
we do not even have a language, just a stupid accent.
So this term, chaîne opératoire, what does it mean? It translates into English as operating chain, which lacks some of the panache of that French term. So that's why we'll stick with the French term. And it refers to all of the steps in the production process leading up to the creation, the usage, the maintenance, the repair, and finally the throwing away, or the fancy archaeological term for that is the deposition of an artifact. So it sort of takes you through the whole life cycle of the artifact and reviews all the different processes that happen to it. Now, it was first developed by André Leroi-Gourhan, a French archaeologist working on prehistoric lithic technology, and he was doing this work in the mid-20th century. Now, fun fact, the name Leroi, also in English we say Leroy, that actually means the king in French. I haven't ever looked up the origin of it, but it could be something like the English version, Fitzroy. Now, Fitzroy was a name that was often given to the bastard or illegitimate sons of the kings. But anyway, that's a little linguistics for you. And our boy Leroy, he actually held positions in museums all over the world, from the British Museum to even places in Japan. Now, fun fact about him, and something close to my heart, is he was actually a fighter for the French resistance, which was based in Lyon, where I actually studied. I lived in a place called Caluire, which is where Jean Moulin, who was actually the head of the French resistance, was captured and, of course, later executed. And the university that I went to there houses the museum to the French resistance. So I kind of gel with this guy already. Now, as I said, what this concept does is it takes the whole life cycle of an object from when it was created to when it finally is thrown away, and it breaks down all the steps very explicitly. Think of it kind of like that children's book, The Little Red Hen, where the little red hen plants the weed and takes care of the weed and harvests the wheat. No one wants to help her do that. But at the end, when she winds up with a loaf of bread, everyone wants to help her eat the bread. Well, we know where that bread eventually is going to end up. And yeah, story of my life. So what would this be useful for? First thing is it gives us some sense of the sophistication of societies. So something simple like an ancient stone tool. All over Europe, they have these things called stone hand axes. Might seem pretty simple. You take a stone and you stick it onto some stick, and there you've got a hand axe. Actually, this shows it's a lot more complicated than that, and I'll get into it. But you see how many different people, processes, and technologies were involved with simply putting a simple artifact like that together. Now, the second thing it also does is it can actually get us inside the heads of those ancient people, which ultimately is what people often find really interesting about archaeology. So it can help us to understand how those people interpreted things, the sense of meaning that the people at that time might have taken away from it. So let's take an example again of that stone hand axe. Seems like a clumsy tool just made by some kind of caveman. Well, what is the axe made out of? What's the stone? Did it come from far away? Let's say it did, because they often did in this case. That meant that those people actually traveled long distances, or they actually had complex trade networks to get that stone from far away to where you find the hand axe. What is it made out of? If it was some carefully selected stone, that means that Either that stone has some technical quality that's desirable, like its ability to be shined or its superior hardness for actually breaking stuff. That means these people actually had that kind of technical understanding. Or maybe it's something particularly unusual looking, rare. A lot of times I think they were like jadeite minerals. So that actually tells you something about what these people valued. Maybe there was the economic concept of scarcity, which makes something valuable. Maybe they valued it for its aesthetic quality. So you're beginning to see how much you can actually learn about this just from seeing what the material was and where it came from. So maybe, as is often found, these stone tools didn't really have any practical use at all. So perhaps it had some kind of symbolic value. It represented something, maybe religious, maybe just a status symbol. That tells you something about these societies. Okay, so they get our stone from somewhere, they quarry it, they shape it, polish it. Now they fasten it to a branch. Okay, that's the next step. And let's say you find a lot of these things. That means they had to probably harvest these branches from somewhere, because if they cut down so many trees, you'd eventually have deforestation. So maybe they harvested a certain kind of tree for this sort of branch. And if there was a lot of them and they were traded, that also implies some kind of industrial process. So this kind of industrial activity, think of all the other processes that it entails. It probably entails trade to get these materials together. It probably entails planning to think about the different materials, people, skills you'll need to get together. And it also entails a distribution process. So it's actually quite sophisticated. And maybe the axe has some kind of special carving or etching on it. Who carved it? If it's a highly specialized carving, maybe that means there was another artisan in the process. So this society had sophisticated enough economy to have, artisans who just did things for aesthetic purposes. Maybe they're all very highly individualized markings, which means that this could connote some concept of ownership, or that it belonged to a certain person or clan or class of people. That's a whole other step, opening up even more possibilities. Do we see some kind of evidence of wear, tear, and repair? That tells us about, was it used or not? And if it was repaired, that might mean it was used over a long period of time. And this does happen in sort of real life. Some of these ancient tools have a lot of wear and tear, meaning they were used for chopping something or hitting something. Others do not at all. And from dating and other processes, they can tell they were in use for a long time. They were being handled for a long time. What would something that was handled for a long time but doesn't have any apparent use mean? Again, something symbolic, something ritual, something ornamental. So how were these axes eventually disposed of? All over Northwestern Europe, you find weapons and valuables from ancient times deposited in water. What could this say? Maybe those things, especially if they have those individual markings, were tied to individual people. And when that person died, the object was put to rest. If you find lots of valuable stuff in water, that probably means the water had some kind of a sacred symbolic meaning. And actually, this is exactly what happened all over Northwestern Europe. And it's actually where the concept of a wishing well comes from, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So there you have it, Chaîne Opératoire. You could see how powerful this is, even with something relatively simple like a stone tool. And if you want a really complicated example, let's take another stone, Stonehenge. Those stones, some of them were locally quarried. Some of them were quarried all the way from Wales, dozens of miles away. They had been erected in other stone circles long before Stonehenge came around. They were brought across the country. Then, as I said, the locally quarried stones were erected. There were people buried around there. They were changed a few times. So that's a really complex chaîne opératoire. And the thing still exists today, so I guess it was never disposed of in any way. All right, well, anyway, we can play this game all day. Why don't we, for fun, you can look around your house, figure out what the chaîne opératoire was of, I don't know, this. It's a game we can all play. It tells you a lot about ancient societies. So, C for Chaîne Opératoire. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.